One guy wanted me to give him a cycle. Give me the biggest cycle you can give me. I said, I'll give you what I've done, the biggest cycle I've ever done. He then did the competition. After, he says, yeah, it worked. I just doubled everything you told me to do. This was an amateur at his first competition. Coach Greg, and it's now peak week for the Mr. Olympia. Many of the athletes like C-Bum, they're going to be showing you their grocery hauls after they flew on their private jets to compete at the Olympia. They're going to be saying, this is what I do. I cut these many carbs and I ate this much protein. I cut the fats and I did this and did that. So rather than going over C-Bum's diet and the peak week diet and what they're eating up and going over their grocery haul, I'm going to be going over their drug haul and exposing exactly what these guys are doing. So many of these guys at the Olympia, they're going to be saying they do very low doses, that they're monitored by their doctors and they have immaculate blood work and that they're doing it healthy. This is bullshit and you know it and they know it. And so whatever drugs that make it look like they're taking, just imagine it 5 or 10 times more than that. They are only scratching the surface what they're taking. And so they'll say, I'm just doing 300 or 400 milligrams of testosterone, or I'm just doing HRT. That's what they do at the end when they lower their doses of testosterone because they're trying to peak for competition. Whatever you think they're doing is probably 5 or 10 times more. And it's not just one drug. There are dozens of things that many of these guys are going to be taking. And so I'm going to do my best to go over all of them. And so I can't go into detail over every single one of these drugs that they're going to be taking because it would take me 10 hours. But I've already covered the majority of these drugs in detail in videos in the past. And so just look them up. And so the first thing we want to know is in terms of drug doses and so on, what are the difference between the open class, classic physique, and men's physique? I'm telling you, there's hardly any. The main difference between guys who compete in men's physique versus classic versus open is genetics. Almost all of the drugs are exactly the same. The guys who are in men's physique, they're classic physique wannabes. They wish they could do classic physique, but they don't have enough muscle. Perhaps they're missing the thighs. The guys in classic physique, they tend to have too much trouble putting on that much more muscle. And so, for example, if Chris Bumstead could snap his fingers and put on 30 pounds of muscle without upping the doses, he would do it. And why would he do that? He would want to be Derek Lunsford and be the real Mr. Olympia champion. Remember, the Olympia started with open men's bodybuilding. Classic physique came later. And so Chris Bumstead had put it on the map, but if he could, he would be trying to win the open class Mr. Olympia, but he just doesn't quite have those genetics. Now, is it possible that he could? Maybe, but I don't think so. I don't think he has genetics to put on that much muscle. And so when comparing all these guys, essentially they're going to be taking the exact same things with a few caveats. Growth hormone and insulin for classic physique and men's physique are going to be at slightly lower doses. They don't want to take the risk of growing their stomachs, and in men's physique and classic physique, it's very important to have a very small waist. Growth hormone, common dose going to be 10 IUs or more of GH a day. And now the smarter ones, closer to the competition, they're going to be cutting out their growth hormone because growth hormone tends to hold a lot of water. And so you don't want to look watery, you don't want to look bloated, and so GH is oftentimes lowered and or reduced in order to get shredded on stage. And as far as insulin, the majority of these guys are in fact using insulin, and they're doing that to put on even more muscle. Insulin is very anabolic, and guess what? It's not even illegal. Oftentimes kids can walk into the pharmacy and purchase insulin. I was once in a locker room at a Good Life and a bunch of 16-year-old kids had a bottle of insulin and they were talking about all the chocolate bars they were gonna eat and inject insulin and then go have a workout and put on all this muscle. These were teenagers, they were kids. Insulin, very dangerous, and although not a steroid, oftentimes abused by people who are competing. Oh, and as far as the women go, women also doing almost all of the exact same drugs. Those competing in figure, physique, bodybuilding, they're taking the same things, although in somewhat smaller doses. Now, I'd have to make a completely separate video if I just wanted to go in women's bikini. Remember, I've done all of these videos in the past. I simply don't do them anymore because I've already done them. Let's start off with testosterone. Testosterone in peak week is going to be lowered and or it should already be cut out. Testosterone holds water. Water makes you bloated. And when you're on stage, you want to look shredded. And so if you've been taking testosterone, you're not going to look as cut or as dry. So when I was competing, I would cut out testosterone about 2.5 weeks before the competition. These are longer esters, for example, cypionate or nanenthate. And so you want to cut them out so it has time to get lower and lower in the bloodstream so that by showtime, it's very low and doesn't cause you to hold water. Now, because you're taking on testosterone throughout the cycle, most people are going to be taking Nolvadex, and as the show gets closer, they're going to add in letrozole, also known as Femra. And why is that? Well, to lower your estrogen. The more estrogen you have, the more water you're going to look, and you're not going to look shredded. Even at 5% body fat, if you have a layer of water, you're not going to look as lean. In the weeks prior, the competitors are, for the most part, going to be taking letrozole. It's going to crush your estrogen levels by about 98%. This makes it more difficult to train, more easy to get injured, and it can also affect your sex drive. And so all these guys are on a shit ton of steroids. Oftentimes, they're going to have no energy to have sex and no desires whatsoever. And they're oftentimes impotent in the weeks leading up to the competition. And so what about the doses? Testosterone, all these drugs and so on. Well, they vary. They vary from a lot to a shit ton to a Turk ton. And so in other words, way more than they should be taking. I'm on 140 milligrams a week. Many guys, you add a 0 to that and they're going to take a lot more. And not only for testosterone, but for everything. And so when you're talking about doses, most of the products they're going to take, they're going to be in the thousands. It's not going to be how many 100 milligrams, but it's normally going to be a number that starts with a 1 and ends with a 0. And so 1,000, this much, it's giving 4 digits. That is the kind of doses these guys are taking. Everyone wants to know about this Tren. Of course, almost every single person is taking Tren. The ones that didn't are going to take it next year. And why? Because the reason they didn't win was because they didn't use Tren. If you're not taking Tren and your competitors are, they're going to have a huge advantage over you. And so most likely the next year you're going to do it, because why are you going to want to place 9th when you know you could place 8th? And so they're going to be taking Tren. And so for the most part, people are going to use Tren for the second half of their cycle. If they're doing a 16-week cycle, which is very common at this level, oftentimes people are doing cycles all year round. They can't cycle off. And then what happens? They burn out. And then they withdraw from the Olympia. We've seen Nick Walker do this, many other competitors doing this. These guys, they're blasting gear all year long, and then they wonder why their bodies are no longer responding. Tren, well, for me, I was doing about 500 milligrams a week. That's what I can handle. But I've coached guys that I had to beg, plead, don't use more than 700 or 800. They were using far more. One guy wanted me to give him a cycle. Give me the biggest cycle you can give me. I said, I'll give you what I've done, the biggest cycle I've ever done. He then did the competition. After, he says, yeah, it worked. I just doubled everything you told me to do. This was an amateur at his first competition. And so if you don't think IFBB pros, whose livelihoods depend on them winning or placing, getting them money, or the fact that they need the validation, the external validation from being on that stage, placing in the top 5, or perhaps even winning, then you're redonkulous. These guys are desperate to win. The majority of people at that level have personality disorders. Why do you think they would risk their lives to stand on stage for 5 minutes in order to be applauded by other men? I'm not kidding. This is essentially the sport. And so they are endangering their health, their lives, to get shredded so that you can clap and give them the applause. Congratulations, you look great. And for the most part, many of these guys are going to be disappointed. I got ripped off. It was politics. Or you just didn't win. Only one person in each category can win, and so there are going to be dozens of other competitors that are going to be disappointed. Next, a drug of choice for almost everyone competing, especially in peak week, it's Masteron. Masteron has no estrogenic side effects. It doesn't allow testosterone to convert to estrogen, and so you don't look bloated, you don't look watery, and you look hard, grainy hard. That is the look that you want. And so when I was getting close to competition, as I lowered the testosterone, I doubled the Masteron. As testosterone went down, Masteron went up. That allowed me to have the same level of androgen so that I could push harder than last time. And if you could source Primo, that was equally, if not more, sought after. But remember, at the top level, open class bodybuilding, this stuff doesn't matter that much. They're taking so many drugs that are far stronger that if you add in Primo, you're hardly even going to notice the difference. Tren is 5 times stronger than Primo and or Masteron. And so when you're doing a lot of Tren, by adding in, let's call it a gram of Primo, you're not going to notice that much difference. Is it noticeable? A little bit. And so you're thinking, well, why are they doing it? Because it's a little bit noticeable. You'll do anything for 1 or 2% improvements. Now, in open class bodybuilding, they perhaps don't worry about this as much. They're gonna just throw everything in there, including the kitchen sink, and hope for the best. But in classic physique and men's physique, likely there are a few competitors, they're not going as crazy on Tren, and so these guys are going to use more Primo and more Masteron than last time. And how much? Probably around 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams a week for the majority of competitors. If you're an amateur, don't copy these formulas. And so these guys have amazing genetics for being able to use this amount of drugs without being unalived. Most people who take this amount of drugs, it's gonna mess up their blood work, their heart, their kidneys, everything, that they would have to stop. They've oftentimes been doing this for 10 or more years. And they just have such amazing genetics that they can take 1,000 milligrams of Tren, perhaps 1,500, and still live to tell about it. And what about SARMs? Yes, SARMs are oftentimes being used by many of the competitors. I don't have time to go over them. I'm just going to group them. You know what SARMs are: Ostarine, RAD140, LGD 4033. There's several different SARMs, and trust me, they're being used especially by the females. What are they not taking? Well, the majority are not going to be taking DECA, and if they are, they're idiots. If you're taking DECA during peak week, it's going to cause you to hold more water. So it's not something you're going to want. Some will opt to take EQ. However, EQ is going to have some level of water retention, and so it's not ideal. And so the injectables of choice are Masteron, Primo, and Tren. However, with Tren, many will have problems with prolactin. It kind of gives you a little bit more of a bloated appearance, and so oftentimes they'll reduce Tren the final week of the competition. And so, for example, in the final week, oftentimes people, they stop injecting, they stop pinning. And the reason for that is, well, if I pin my shoulder, I might get some swelling. You might have a bad shot. It's going to look horrendous on stage. And we've seen that many times in the past. And so the last place people inject is in their glutes, the upper right and upper left quadrants. These are covered by the posing suit. But when you look at the Olympia competitors, start checking out their glutes. And I'm not doing that to be sus. I'm saying look at the glutes on the top on each side and see how big of a welt you're going to see on either side. That is where they are pinning. There are fluids in there, the oils, and their swelling is horrendous. You're going to see many of these competitors that have huge glutes on the tops. That is from pinning harder than last time. Another common injectable is Winstrol Inject, but I would highly recommend that you stop doing this before the competition. The potential swelling at the injection site, injections in general, these should be stopped. And what do you do instead? Well, of course, you're doing orals. The orals, which people have been doing throughout their contest prep, usually in lower doses at the start and building up higher and higher as the show gets near. The injectables, they go up higher than last time, oftentimes doubled. The most your body can handle for a week, that's the amount you're going to take. And so if you can handle 20 milligrams of Halo, you're going to take 20. Most guys are going to be taking 30 to 50 milligrams of Halo each and every day. Remember, Halo is very strong. Now, Mike Israetel, he says, I took 5 milligrams and he basically lost his mind. 5 milligrams of Halo, 100 milligrams of Tren, I don't believe a word of it. That's what he says he was taking, but do you believe him? I mean, with the thoughts that he had on 5 milligrams of Halo and 100 milligrams of Tren, there are bikini girls taking far more than that.
All I feel is rage and frustration.
Aside from Halo, Anavar and or Winstrol, highly sought after. Now, in my opinion, Winstrol is poor man's Anavar. If you can't afford the Anavar, you're going to get Winstrol. Now, all of these guys can afford it, and so I do believe that the majority of them would prefer to use Anavar over Winstrol. Anavar is healthier. You can do it at higher doses. Going to give you a great and amazing pump. Going to give you that strength that you need, and it's going to give you a very full look to your muscles. Halotestin, it makes you grainy hard. Hardly puts on any muscle whatsoever. And so although it's a steroid, it doesn't help you to build a lot of muscle. But wow, does it make you aggressive. And when it's peak week and you're hardly eating anything, you go and see their grocery haul and it's essentially asparagus and that's it. These guys are taking so much Halo to give them the energy to keep going. When you take Halo, it kind of feels like you're blasting ephedrine without quite the stimulant feeling. You're aggressive, you're angry. It kind of feels like when you're taking Turk Builder. Now, people are gonna shit on me. You're a snake oil salesman. I'm telling you how it makes you feel. When you're taking Halo, it's gonna cause you to have problems sleeping. It doesn't put on a ton of muscle, but wow, does it make you strong. And so when you take Turk Builder for the first time, for me, happened on day one. I'm in the gym and I feel like attacking the weights. Now, it can cause anxiety, it can get you angry. And for me, Halo, more so than Tren, was probably the steroid that I liked the least in terms of how it made me feel mentally. It made me angry, it made me aggressive. I didn't like how it made me feel. But when I was sitting on the couch and had barely had the energy to tie my shoe and stand up, go and do 2 hours of cardio, it got me through that session. And so I essentially would take almost anything just to ensure I could get through that workout. Next, during peak week, Proviron, we're upping the dose. Typically, people are adding this in perhaps 6 weeks out. It's going to decrease the amount of water in the body, make you look that much harder. And so 150 milligrams a day of Proviron, very common dose. This allows you to get that grainy hard look on stage. Also helps with your sex drive. And so during peak week, when you're struggling to have anything happen whatsoever, this is definitely something that can give you a boost. Now, for fat burners, the Clenin T3 that you've been abusing for the past 8 weeks, this is going to start to go down. You don't want to be on very high doses of Clenin T3 the day of the competition. You don't want the jitters on stage. You don't want to feel nervous. And so my recommendation is you take these things and reduce it in half. If you cut it out completely, you're perhaps going to have no energy. You're not going to feel good. And so you still have to keep it in your cycle, but perhaps at 50%. Next, some people, because they're behind, because they don't know how to diet, because they don't have my cookbook, these guys, they resort to taking DNP. Now, I can't even talk about DNP because the video will get completely demonetized. People don't like it. It's a very potent fat burner. I'm talking about burning thousands of calories a day, but it makes you feel horrendous. Imagine this. Every step you take is up a mountain. And so every day you're living as though you're walking up a mountain. You're sweating profusely. It feels horrendous. And you feel horrible. The more you eat, the worse you feel. And so your body is burning off a ton of calories. Now, if you take too much, you die. No big deal, right? But many bodybuilders, they resort to taking this. Now, in my professional bodybuilding coaching career, I've only had maybe 3 or 4 competitors who've taken this. I didn't want them to take this. They're doing it on their own. I was not in favor of this, but some people, they do what they do. And if you rely on this, when you come off of it, it's a nightmare. And so one female in particular, she was a top 3 nationals competitor, was shredded, looked amazing, hired me. I'm looking her up on Instagram like, wow, this girl's good. Probably gonna turn her pro. I'm very confident in this woman. She sends me her progress photos. Remember, she's posting all year. 220 pounds. And I'm like, but you're 145 in the pictures on Instagram. Oh yeah, I've gained a lot of weight since then. And I put her on her diet eating 1,200 calories and her weight was going up. I don't believe what you're eating. Well, I abused DNP, I was taking Clen 150 micrograms, I was taking T3 150 micrograms, and then I stopped cold turkey, and now my metabolism, it doesn't work. All right, 1,200 calories a day, gaining weight. 800 calories a day, gained 4 pounds that week. I don't believe you. Calories in, calories out. I don't care how screwed up your metabolism is. When you're 220 pounds, you can't eat 800 calories a day and gain weight. But she didn't like the fact that I told her that, and so I coached her for a month, and she's never set foot on stage again. Those are some of the dangers of abusing these drugs.
Next time on Coach Greg.
And what about some of the fun drugs? You know, the ones that Togi likes to take?